Engineers spent 7 days and $250,000 on a dead Bentley Continental GT until a single dad started it in 24 hours. You know, there are days in a man's life that start out just like any other. Grease under your fingernails, cold coffee on the workbench, your little girl's drawings taped to the inside of your toolbox. And then, out of nowhere, the whole world flips upside down and nothing is ever the same again. That was one of those days for Jake. Let me set the scene for you, because I want you to really feel this. Jake's shop sat at the end of a road that most people drove past without a second look. Small place. Cinder block walls painted a faded cream color, a hand-painted sign above the door that said Merritt's Auto. The letters slightly uneven because Jake had painted it himself the year he opened, back when his hands were still shaking from everything that had gone wrong in his life. The shop smelled like motor oil and old rubber, and on certain mornings when the breeze came in just right through the side door, like the coffee he always brewed in a dented percolator on the far end of the workbench. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't supposed to be. It was his. And that meant everything. His daughter, Lily, 5 years old, gap-toothed with 2 little pigtails that Jake still hadn't fully mastered tying, had been dropped off at kindergarten that morning just like every other morning. He'd knelt down outside the school gate, looked her in the eyes and said, "You gonna be brave today, Bug?" And she'd nodded seriously, like she understood the weight of the question, and said, "Are you, Daddy?" He laughed about that the whole drive back. That's the kind of thing that keeps a man going. You hold on to that. Now. The Bentley. 7 days. $250,000. A team of 6 engineers flown in from 3 different states, wearing clean polo shirts and carrying diagnostic tablets that cost more than Jake's entire inventory. And that car, a Bentley Continental GT in a shade of deep midnight blue that almost looked purple under certain lights, with cream leather interior that still smelled brand new even after sitting dead in that lot for a week. That car had beaten every single one of them. They'd packed up and left 2 mornings ago. Quietly. The kind of quiet that means men are embarrassed. Ashley had called Jake on a Tuesday. Her voice on the phone was the voice of someone who hadn't slept properly in days. A little too controlled, like she was working hard to hold it together. She'd gotten his number from a parts supplier he'd worked with for 12 years, a guy named Donnie who apparently told her, "Lady, if those engineers couldn't fix it, there's only one man I know who might even understand why." She didn't believe it. You could hear that in her voice. She was calling Jake the way you call your last option. Not with hope, but with the exhaustion of someone who's already lost and just can't stop moving yet. "I'll be honest with you, Mr. Merritt," she'd said. "I don't have much faith left in this process. But I've been told you're good. So, can you come look at it?" He'd said yes, because that's what he did. Now imagine you pull up to a private storage facility, not the kind where regular people keep their old furniture, but the kind with climate control and security cameras and a gate that buzzes you in. You're driving a 10-year-old pickup truck with a cracked side mirror, and you park it next to a brand new Range Rover, and 2 cars with dealer plates, and you feel the weight of that contrast settle on your shoulders like something physical. You grab your tool bag, worn leather, patches of electrical tape on the handles, and you walk in like you belong there, because you do. Ashley was waiting inside. She was standing with her arms crossed, wearing a jacket that probably cost more than Jake's monthly rent, her dark hair pulled back in a way that looked effortless but probably wasn't. She had brown eyes that were sharp even when they were tired. And they were very tired. There were faint shadows under them, the kind that tell you a person has been carrying something heavy for a while. Not just the car. Something older than the car. She looked at Jake when he walked in, really looked at him. The way people do when they're trying to decide in the first 5 seconds whether or not to take someone seriously. And something in her expression softened, just slightly, before she locked it back down. "You're Jake Merritt," she said. Not a question. "That's me." She glanced at his tool bag, then back at his face. The other team had 4 diagnostic systems and a factory technician from the UK. Jake nodded slowly. How'd that go for them? A pause. Then, the tiniest crack of something in her expression. Not quite a smile, but close. Fair point. He didn't make a big show of it. That's one thing you need to understand about Jake. He wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone. He just walked up to that car, crouched down beside it, put his hand on the hood like he was greeting something alive, and got to work. What happened over the next few hours? The way he traced every wire, listened to the fuel system like a doctor with a stethoscope, ran his fingers along components the engineers had marked, checked, and cleared. That's a whole other story. But what matters is this. By late afternoon, he'd found something, tucked behind the secondary relay panel in a section of the wiring harness that would have been unremarkable to anyone who didn't already know what they were looking for. There was damage. Not wear and tear damage. Not a short from water or age. This was deliberate, calculated. Something had been done to this car. Done carefully, done by someone who knew exactly what they were doing, and done to make sure the car would never run again unless you knew precisely where to look. Jake sat back on his heels and stared at it for a long moment. He's the kind of man who doesn't react right away. He lets things settle. He looked at the damage, the precise, almost surgical nature of it, and he felt something cold move through him, slow and quiet, like ice forming on still water. Because this wasn't an accident, this was a message. He didn't say anything to Ashley right away. He kept working. He fixed what could be fixed that day, got the car to crank over once, then let it rest. He made a note of everything he'd found, took photos on his phone, the kind of habit a careful man develops over years of covering himself in a world that doesn't always give careful men credit. Ashley had watched him for most of the afternoon without saying much. At one point, she'd brought him a coffee, black, no sugar, which he accepted without comment, and sat down on a folding chair a few feet away, watching his hands move with the kind of quiet attention that meant she was actually seeing him. Not just watching, seeing. Later, when the light outside had gone orange and long, she said, "You found something, didn't you?" It wasn't a question either. Jake wiped his hands on a rag, stood up slowly, and looked at her directly. "I need to ask you something," he said, "and I need you to be honest with me. Because what I tell you next is going to depend on your answer." She uncrossed her arms. He noticed that. A small thing, but it meant something. She was opening herself to whatever was coming. "Okay," she said. "Who else has access to this car? Who knew it was going to be brought in for repair? Who knew the timeline? Who knew where it was being stored?" She went very still. Not the stillness of someone who doesn't know the answer. The stillness of someone who just heard out loud the question they've been afraid to ask themselves. Her jaw tightened. Her eyes moved, not away from him, but inward, like she was running through a list in her mind and not liking what she was finding. "Marcus," she said. The name came out quiet, almost like it hurt to say it. Jake nodded once. He didn't push. He didn't say "I knew it" or "tell me everything" or any of the things a lesser man might have said in that moment. He just stood there, steady as a wall, and let her have the space to feel what she was feeling. Because here's the thing. Nobody tells you about the moment when someone you trusted gets exposed. It doesn't feel like justice right away. It doesn't feel like relief. It feels like the floor dropping out from under you. Like everything you thought was solid just turned out to be paper. Ashley knew Marcus. She'd trusted Marcus. She'd been engaged to Marcus. That polished, smooth-talking, tailored suit-wearing, country club-smiling version of a man who had always made her feel like she was lucky to have him. And Jake, this quiet mechanic with grease on his hands and a gap-toothed kid's drawing folded in his breast pocket, had found in 4 hours what 6 engineers with $250,000 hadn't found in a week. Not because he was smarter, but because he was looking, and because, when it matters, the men who actually care always find what others miss. The chapter of Jake and Ashley's story was just beginning. But somewhere across town, in a glass office with a view and a scotch poured before noon, Marcus didn't know yet that the clock had started ticking. He would. You ever notice how the days that change your life forever never announce themselves? They don't come with warning signs or dramatic music. They come in quiet. They come wrapped in ordinary things. The smell of motor oil in the morning air, the sound of a kindergartner laughing on the other end of a phone call, the way a woman looks at you when she's trying to decide whether or not she can trust you with something that could break her. That morning, Jake had woken up at 5:15 like he always did. No alarm. Just his body, trained by years of being the only adult in the house. The only one responsible. The only one who couldn't afford to sleep through anything. He'd padded down the hall in his socks, checked on Lily, still asleep, curled up like a comma around her stuffed elephant Mr. Peanut, who was missing one button eye and had an ear that Jake had sewn back on twice, and stood in her doorway for a moment just breathing. That's something only single dads understand. That doorway moment. That specific quiet of standing there watching your kids sleep and feeling the full weight of everything you're carrying. And somehow, inexplicably feeling stronger because of it instead of crushed by it. He'd made coffee, packed Lily's lunch, peanut butter and banana, cut into triangles because she'd decided squares were for babies approximately 3 weeks ago. He'd driven her to school, done the gate routine, heard her ask if he was going to be brave, and driven back to the shop with the windows down, even though the morning air was still cold. He hadn't told anyone yet what he'd found in that car. Not the parts supplier Donnie, who would have blabbed to half the county by noon. Not his neighbor Carl, a retired electrician who sometimes came by the shop to drink coffee and complain about his knees. Not Ashley, beyond what he'd implied the evening before. He needed to be sure first. Because Jake was the kind of man who understood that an accusation without iron-solid proof isn't justice. It's just noise. And noise, in his experience, had a way of hurting the wrong people. So that morning, while the shop was still empty and the first light was coming in sideways through the high windows and painting long gold lines across the concrete floor, Jake spread everything out on his workbench. His notes, his photos, a hand-drawn diagram of the wiring section he'd found. He looked at all of it slowly. The way you read something important, not just scanning for the gist, but actually absorbing every word, every detail. The damage to the wiring harness was specific. Whoever had done it knew exactly which component to compromise to create a failure that would look electrical, look random, look like something that could have happened over time. They'd removed a small section of the protective sheath on a particular wire and bent the conductor just enough, that under heat and vibration, it would arc and kill the engine management system completely. Not immediately. Gradually. Like a slow poison designed to look like natural causes. It would have taken 15-20 minutes to do, maybe less if you knew what you were doing. The kind of job that would have required access to the car, knowledge of its specific wiring architecture, and the cold composure to do it carefully while knowing exactly what you were setting in motion. Jake stared at the photos. Then he picked up his phone and called Ashley. She answered on the second ring, which told him she'd been awake already, probably sitting somewhere with cold coffee and thoughts that wouldn't leave her alone. "I need to show you something," he said. "Can you come to the shop this morning?" A pause. "Is it bad?" He thought about how to answer that honestly. "It's clear," he said finally. "Clear is better than confusing, even when it's hard." Another pause, longer this time. He could almost hear her deciding something. "I'll be there at 9, she said. She pulled up 20 minutes early. Jake watched her through the shop window as she got out of her car. A silver car. Elegant and low to the ground. The kind of car that looked like it had been designed to move even when standing still. She was wearing dark jeans and a simple white shirt, her hair down today, and she stood beside her car for a moment before walking in, looking up at the Merritt's auto sign with an expression he couldn't quite read from where he was standing. She stepped inside and looked around. Really looked. The way she had when she'd first looked at him. Taking inventory. The workbench covered in tools arranged with a specificity that told you this wasn't chaos, it was a system. Lily's drawings taped to the inside of the open toolbox cabinet. Crayon suns. A house with 2 tall flowers. A figure with enormous hands that was presumably Jake himself. An old radio on the shelf above the oil cans, turned low, playing something country and unhurried. Her eyes stopped on the drawings. Just for a second. But Jake noticed. "Coffee?" he said. "Please." He poured her a cup from the percolator. Real coffee. The kind that had been sitting just long enough to be serious about itself, and set it on the corner of the workbench nearest to her. Then he turned his phone toward her and walked her through everything. He didn't editorialize. He didn't tell her what to feel or what it meant. He laid it out the same way he'd lay out a diagnostic report. "Here's what I found. Here's where I found it. Here's what it tells us. His voice was steady and measured, and he kept his eyes on the photos rather than on her face, giving her the dignity of having her reaction in private. He heard her breathing change, not dramatically, not a gasp, nothing like that, just a slight shallowing. The kind that happens when your body absorbs a blow that your mind hasn't fully processed yet. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, very quietly, he knew the service schedule. He always knew when the car was going in for anything. Detailing, oil changes, everything. He liked being involved. I thought he was being attentive. The word attentive landed in the air between them like something rusted and broken. When did you two, Jake started. 4 months ago, she said. I ended the engagement 4 months ago. She picked up the coffee cup. Put it back down without drinking from it. He didn't take it the way I expected. Jake nodded slowly. He didn't ask what that meant. He could fill in the outline well enough. He has money, she continued. Her voice had a different quality now. Flat, careful, like someone diffusing something. His family has money. He's used to things resolving in his favor. When I ended it, he was... She paused, searching for the right word. Gracious. Too gracious. The kind of gracious that isn't really gracious at all. Jake understood that too. He'd met men like that. Men who smiled wide and shook your hand, and the whole time their eyes were telling you a very different story. He's been trying to get back together, Jake asked. He's been trying to make my life difficult in ways that are hard to prove, she said. Small things. Things that could all be coincidences if you wanted to believe they were coincidences. She finally picked up the coffee and drank, and he watched her jaw set. This car was the last thing my father gave me before he passed. Marcus knew that. He knew exactly what it meant to me. Jake felt something quiet and hard settle in his chest. He'd never met Marcus. But in that moment, he understood the man completely. The type who, when they can't possess something, decides if they can't have it, they'll make sure it doesn't work right. The type who hurts people in ways that leave no fingerprints, hiding behind plausible deniability and the confidence that comes from having a last name that opens doors. Do you want to use what I found? Jake asked. She looked at him. What do you mean? I mean exactly what I said. This is your call. I found it, I documented it, and it goes wherever you want it to go. Or nowhere. That's your choice. She studied him for a long moment. That same quality of attention she'd given him the day before. That sense of a woman who had learned the hard way to look past the surface of things. Why does it matter to you? She asked. You fixed the car. You could have just handed in the invoice and gone home. Jake was quiet for a second. Because I've got a 5-year-old who's watching how I move through the world, he said simply. And I don't want her to grow up thinking that finding the truth and then walking away from it is normal. Ashley looked at him. Really looked at him. And something shifted behind her eyes. Something quiet and significant like a door opening that had been closed for a long time. She left around noon with a copy of Jake's documentation, the photos, the notes, the diagram, saved on a USB drive he'd put in a plain envelope and labeled in his careful, blocky handwriting. They hadn't made any big declarations, hadn't laid out a plan. She'd just taken the envelope, thanked him in a voice that was steadier than when she'd arrived, and walked back to her silver car. Jake watched her go. Then he went back to work, because there was a '98 Silverado with a broken alternator waiting for him, and a parts delivery arriving at 2. And the world didn't stop turning just because something significant had happened in it. But something had changed. He could feel it the same way you feel a weather shift before it arrives. In the pressure, in the stillness, in the particular quality of the air. He worked through the afternoon with that feeling sitting quietly in the back of his mind. Picked Lily up at 3:15. She ran to him at the gate with her backpack bouncing and both pigtails coming undone and a painting in her hand that she'd made during craft time. Green handprints arranged into a Christmas tree shape, except it was May, which she explained was because Christmas trees are the best trees. Daddy, so I made one anyway. He taped it to the visor on the passenger side of the truck. That night, after Lily was bathed and fed and read to and finally, firmly asleep with Mr. Peanut locked in one arm, Jake sat at his kitchen table with his notes spread out in front of him and thought hard about what came next. Because here's the thing nobody tells you when you stumble into something like this. The finding is the easy part. The finding is just eyes and patience and knowing what you're looking for. What comes after? The navigating, the deciding, the understanding that you've just stepped into a situation that belongs to people with significantly more resources than you. That's where it gets complicated. He thought about Marcus. He'd looked him up that evening. It wasn't hard. The man had a LinkedIn profile full of glossy professional photos and an Instagram that was basically a catalog of expensive restaurants and yacht weekends. Dark hair, always slightly too perfectly styled. The smile of a man who'd never had to apologize for anything. The kind of eyes that looked warm in photos but that Jake suspected were something different in person. Calculating, maybe. Or just empty in the specific way that certain kinds of privilege can make a person empty. He thought about Ashley. About the way she'd said he knew exactly what it meant to me. And the way her voice had stayed level even as something behind it didn't. He thought about Lily asleep down the hall. And then he made a decision. He wasn't going to go looking for a fight. He wasn't built that way. But he also wasn't going to look the other way. He was going to do what he always did. Be steady. Be careful. Document everything. And trust that the truth, if you treat it right, has a way of doing the work itself. He folded the notes, put them in the envelope with the USB copy, and slid it under the corner of his workbench back at the shop the next morning, in the one spot where he kept the things that mattered most. And then he waited. Because that's something else single dads get real good at, waiting, and being ready when the moment comes. What Jake didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that across town, in that glass office with the expensive scotch, Marcus had already heard through someone in his orbit that a mechanic had actually fixed the car. And Marcus, being exactly the kind of man he was, had not reacted well to that news. Not well at all. There's a specific kind of danger that comes from a man who's used to winning. Not the loud kind of danger. Not the kind that shows up at your door yelling. The quiet kind. The kind that wears a good watch and speaks in measured tones and makes phone calls instead of threats. Because men like that learned a long time ago that the phone call is more effective than the threat, and leaves far less evidence. Jake didn't know the call had already been made. He was under the hood of a Ford F-150 with a coolant leak when his phone buzzed on the workbench. He wiped his hands, checked the screen. Unknown number. He let it go to voicemail the way he always did with unknowns and went back to work. The voicemail was from a woman named Sandra, who identified herself as a caseworker with the county child welfare office. She said she'd received a complaint. She said it was routine. She said she'd like to schedule a home visit at his earliest convenience to follow up on some concerns that had been raised regarding the welfare of a minor child in his care. Jake listened to that message standing completely still in the middle of his shop, with the sun coming in through the side door and the radio playing low and everything around him perfectly ordinary. And he felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Fear. Not the surface kind. The deep kind. The kind that lives in the part of a parent that never fully relaxes. That's always half listening even when you're asleep. That knows and knows. That the one thing in your life you cannot afford to lose is sleeping down the hall with a one-eyed stuffed elephant. He stood there for 10 seconds, maybe 15, letting the fear move through him without letting it take over. Then he called the number back. Sandra picked up on the third ring. Professional voice, careful and neutral the way people get when they're trained to be neither warm nor cold. She confirmed the complaint had been filed 2 days ago. Anonymous. Concerns cited included unsafe living conditions, neglect of basic needs, and a home environment unsuitable for a child of Lily's age. Jake's jaw tightened so hard he could feel it in his back teeth. "Can you tell me anything about who filed it?" he asked. His voice was steady. He was proud of that. "I'm not able to share that information, Mr. Merritt. But I want to emphasize, this is a standard follow-up process. A home visit doesn't imply—" "When can you come?" he said. She seemed slightly surprised by the directness. "We'd typically schedule within the next—" "Tomorrow," Jake said. "Come tomorrow, whatever time works for you." A pause. 9 a.m.? "I'll be here." He hung up, set the phone face down on the workbench, looked at the half-fixed F-150 in front of him. Then he sat down on his rolling stool, put his elbows on his knees, and let himself think. He knew. He didn't have proof yet, not of this, but he knew the way you know certain things when the pattern is clear enough. 7 days of engineers who couldn't fix a sabotaged car. A quiet engagement that ended 4 months ago with a man who didn't accept endings gracefully. And now 2 days after Jake had handed Ashley a USB drive full of documentation proving what that man had done. An anonymous complaint to child welfare. The timing wasn't a coincidence. Men like Marcus didn't operate on coincidence. They operated on leverage. And when they couldn't find leverage, they manufactured it. Jake thought about Lily, thought about her pigtails and her Christmas tree in May painting and the way she said, "Are you going to be brave today, Daddy?" Like it was the most reasonable question in the world. Thought about the fact that she had been in his soul care since she was 2 years old. That he had never once, not one single time, failed to be there when she needed him. School pickups, sick days, nightmare check-ins at 2 in the morning. Every single one. And some man in a glass office who had never spent a hard day in his life thought he could weaponize that. Thought he could use Jake's daughter against him to keep Ashley quiet and keep himself protected. Jake felt something change in his chest. Not fear anymore. Something quieter, colder, more patient. He picked up his phone and made 2 calls. The first was to his neighbor Carl, the retired electrician. "Carl, I need a favor. Can you come over tomorrow morning before 9? I need a second set of eyes on the house. I just want to make sure everything's in order." Carl, who asked no questions and showed up whenever asked because that's the kind of neighbor Carl was, said, "I'll bring the good coffee." The second call was to a woman named Patricia, his daughter's kindergarten teacher, who had Jake's number saved under Lily's dad, a good guy, because she'd told him that once and it had stuck with him for weeks. "Mrs. Patterson," he said, "I'm really sorry to bother you outside of school hours. I need to ask you something. Has anyone contacted the school recently asking questions about Lily? About her home situation, her behavior, anything like that?" A pause, then carefully, "Mr. Merritt, actually, yes. A few days ago someone called the main office asking general questions. They said they were a family friend checking in. The front desk didn't give out any information, but they did mention it to me because it seemed a little..." She paused again. "Unusual. Did they get a name?" The caller didn't leave one. Jake thanked her. Sat with that for a moment. Then he spent the rest of the afternoon doing something he almost never did. He left the F-150 half finished and spent 4 hours making his house look the way it always felt, like a real home. Not because it needed it, but because he understood now that he was playing against someone who wanted to make it look like something else. And he refused to give that person even an inch. He mopped the kitchen floor that didn't need mopping. Organized the small bookshelf in Lily's room where the picture books had gotten a little shuffled. Laid out her clean clothes for the next morning. Wrote out a week of dinner plans on the whiteboard on the fridge that he kept updated anyway. Because structure helped Lily feel safe. Made sure every smoke detector had a fresh battery. He moved through his own house that evening with the slow, deliberate care of a man who loves something and is not going to let anyone take it from him. Ashley called that night at 8:40. Jake was in the kitchen drinking water and looking at nothing in particular when the phone rang. He answered it. "Someone filed a complaint against you," she said without preamble. Her voice was tight. "With child welfare. I just found out. One of Marcus's people let something slip, and it got back to me." "I know," Jake said. A beat of silence. "You know. Got the call this afternoon." "Jake?" Her voice broke slightly on his name. Just slightly. "Enough. This is my fault. I used your documentation. I had a conversation with my attorney yesterday about next steps and Marcus must have found out that..." "Ashley." His voice was calm. Not dismissive. Calm the way still water is calm. "This isn't your fault. This is who he is. You didn't make him this way." She was quiet for a moment. He could hear her breathing, unsteady in a way it hadn't been the morning she'd sat in his shop. "I'm so sorry," she said. "He's coming after your daughter because of me." "He's coming after my daughter because he's a man who's running scared," Jake said. "And scared men do stupid things. Stupid things leave evidence." Another pause. Longer. "The home visit is tomorrow," she said. It wasn't a question. She'd clearly already done some digging. 9 a.m., he confirmed. "I want to help." "You don't need to." "Jake." Her voice was different now. Not apologetic. Firm. The voice of a woman who'd arrived at a decision. "He came after your child. That's not something I'm going to sit on the sideline about. Tell me what you need." He thought about it for a moment. "I don't need anything for tomorrow," he said honestly. "My house is clean, my record is clean, and my daughter as well. That's all a home visit needs to see." A pause. "But after tomorrow, there's something I need to figure out how to prove, and you might be better positioned to help with that than I am." "Tell me," she said simply. And so, standing in his kitchen at 8:40 on a Thursday night with the light over the stove, the only light on in the house, Jake told her what he'd been thinking. Not a confrontation, not a scene. Something more careful than that. Something that would let the truth do what truth does when you give it enough room. Which is to speak for itself, loudly, in front of exactly the right audience. Ashley listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "There's a charity gala at the end of the month. My family hosts it every year. Marcus will be there. He always comes because he thinks it's important to be seen. Half the city's business community will be there. Journalists, my family's attorneys." Jake said nothing. He let that information sit. "That's 3 weeks," Ashley continued. Her voice had taken on a particular quality now. Focused and clear, like a woman who'd just found the one door in a room she'd been circling for months. 3 weeks to build something that holds. 3 weeks is enough, Jake said. The home visit went the way Jake knew it would, because he'd spent 24 hours making sure it would. Sandra arrived at 9 on the dot, a woman in her mid-40s with reading glasses on a beaded chain and a clipboard, and the specific kind of professional neutrality that comes from having seen a lot of different kinds of homes and not wanting to prejudge any of them. Carl was already there, sitting at the kitchen table drinking coffee, looking for all the world like a man who came over on Thursday mornings all the time. Because actually he kind of did. Sandra walked through the house. Jake walked with her, not hovering, not anxious, just present. She saw Lily's room, the bookshelf organized by size, the small nightlight shaped like a crescent moon, the drawings covering one full wall that Jake had framed properly instead of just taping up, because Lily had asked him once why her art wasn't in frames like the stuff in museums, and he hadn't had a good answer for that. She saw the kitchen, the whiteboard with the week's dinner plan, the lower cabinet where Lily's plates and cups were kept in a section she could reach herself because Jake believed in teaching independence in small ways. She saw the first aid kit mounted on the wall, the emergency numbers written on a piece of paper stuck to the fridge with a magnet, the child lock on the cabinet under the sink. She saw the backyard, small, but with a patch of grass Lily had named the soft part, because she liked to take her shoes off and walk on it, and a small plastic sandbox in the corner, and a chalk drawing of a rainbow on the concrete path that was 3 days old and hadn't rained yet. Sandra wrote on her clipboard for a while. Then she looked at Jake directly over her reading glasses. "Mr. Merritt," she said, "I've done a lot of these visits." He waited. "This is a good home," she said simply. Jake nodded once. Just once. Kept his face even. But when Sandra and Carl were both gone and the door was closed and he was alone in the kitchen, he leaned against the counter and let out a breath that felt like it had been compressed in his chest for 3 days. His hands were slightly unsteady. Just slightly. The adrenaline of being a parent under scrutiny leaving his system all at once, like a slow leak finally done. He looked at Lily's dinner plan whiteboard. Thursday, pasta with the red sauce she likes. Friday, tacos. Saturday, breakfast for dinner. Her pick. He laughed quietly to himself, just a small sound in an empty kitchen. Then he straightened up, poured the rest of Carl's leftover coffee down the drain, and went back to work, because the gala was 3 weeks away. And Jake Merritt was a patient man, but even patient men have a limit, and Marcus, without knowing it, without understanding what he'd set in motion the moment he decided to use an innocent child as a chess piece, had just found Jake's. 3 weeks sounds like a long time until you're living inside them. Every morning Jake woke up at 5:15, checked on Lily, made the coffee, packed the lunch, banana and peanut butter triangles, always triangles, and drove to the shop. And every morning, underneath all of that ordinary routine, there was something else running, quiet and constant like an engine idling in a closed garage. The steady, unhurried work of a man building something that couldn't be rushed. Because here's what Jake understood that Marcus didn't. And this is important, so stay with me here. Men who are used to money think that speed is power. They think that whoever moves first, moves hardest, moves with the most resources, and wins. And sometimes that's true. In boardrooms and courtrooms and country clubs, maybe that's exactly how it works. But in a mechanic's shop, you learn something different. You learn that the most dangerous failures are the ones that were always there, waiting. The ones that were built in from the beginning. The ones that look fine on the surface until the exact moment they don't. And then everything stops at once, completely, with no warning. Jake wasn't going to attack Marcus. He was going to let Marcus's own damage do that. The first week was documentation. Jake had already photographed the wiring harness. Already had the notes, the diagram, the USB drive. But he went further. He reached back out to Donnie, the parts supplier who'd sent Ashley his way, and had a long, careful conversation about the timeline. When Ashley had first called to arrange engineers, who else Donnie had spoken to in that window? Whether anyone had asked questions about the car's location, Donnie, who was 62 years old and had a memory like a filing cabinet and a deep personal dislike of people who thought money made them untouchable, told Jake something interesting. About 10 days before the first engineer team arrived, before anyone had officially announced where the car was being stored, a man had called Donnie's shop asking general questions. Casual questions. The kind you ask when you're trying to get information without appearing to want it. He'd said he was an insurance adjuster. Asked about the Bentley, about the storage facility, about typical repair timelines for that model. He hadn't left a name. But Donnie had a habit, an old-school habit that Jake loved him for, of writing down the callback numbers of every call that came into the shop. In a spiral notebook he kept beside the phone. He read Jake the number. Jake wrote it down. Looked it up that evening on his laptop at the kitchen table, while Lily watched her cartoon in the next room, the volume turned low, the sound of animated animals doing improbable things drifting through the wall like a lullaby. The number was registered to a consulting firm. Small operation. 2 employees listed on their website. Vague service descriptions. Due diligence, asset investigation, private research. Jake looked at the firm's registered business address. Same zip code as Marcus's office building. He wrote that down too. Added it to the envelope. The second week Ashley was busy. She didn't tell Jake everything she was doing, not in detail. But she called every 2 or 3 days and the quality of her voice was changing. Less tight, more focused. The voice of a woman who had stopped feeling like a victim of something and started feeling like the person in charge of what happened next. She'd spoken to her attorney. She'd spoken to 2 members of her family's board. The gala was a family foundation event, which meant her family controlled the guest list, the program, the room. She hadn't told them everything yet, but she was laying groundwork. She'd also, quietly, started reviewing 6 months of correspondence between herself and Marcus. Emails, texts, notes from meetings where he'd been present. She was looking for the thread, the specific documentable thread, that connected his access to the car, his knowledge of its location, and his motive. She called Jake on a Wednesday night and said, "He texted me 11 days before the engineers arrived. He asked if I'd gotten the car situation sorted out yet. I hadn't told anyone the car wasn't starting. I hadn't mentioned it publicly. The only people who knew were me and the storage facility manager." Jake was quiet for a moment. "Save that text," he said. "Already screenshotted, dated, and sent to my attorney," she said. There was something in her voice when she said it. Not triumph exactly, something more complicated. The particular kind of exhaustion that comes from confirming something you'd hoped wasn't true. "You okay?" Jake asked. A pause. The kind that means someone is deciding how honest to be. "I keep thinking about how long I didn't see it," she said. "Not the car, just him. How long I thought the way he operated was normal, like his version of caring was just how caring looked." Jake thought about that carefully before he answered. Some people are good at performing the shape of something without having the substance of it, he said. That's not a failure of your judgment, that's a failure of their character. Those are different things. Silence on the line. Then quietly, where did you learn to talk like that? He almost laughed. Lily asks a lot of questions, he said. You get good at finding honest answers. She was quiet for another moment. Then, she sounds like a remarkable kid. She really is, he said. And the simple honesty of it, unguarded, unhesitant, sat between them on the line like something warm. The third week was the hardest, not because anything went wrong, but because waiting when you're close is its own particular kind of difficult. Jake felt it in the shop, a restlessness underneath the routine, a heightened awareness that made every ordinary thing feel slightly charged. He was sleeping fine, eating fine, functioning completely normally, but there was a layer of alertness that didn't switch off. On the Tuesday of that third week, something happened that Jake hadn't anticipated. Marcus showed up at the shop, not aggressively, not dramatically. He pulled up in a dark gray luxury sedan, got out unhurried, straightened his jacket, and walked in through the open bay door like a man arriving for a scheduled appointment that he himself had scheduled. He was exactly what his LinkedIn profile had suggested. Tall, well-assembled, the kind of handsome that came more from maintenance than genetics. Dark hair perfectly in place, a watch on his wrist that cost more than Jake's truck. He looked around the shop the way certain men look at things that are beneath them, not with contempt exactly, but with a particular incuriosity that was almost worse. Then he looked at Jake and smiled. Jake Merritt, he said, warm, relaxed. I've heard a lot about you. Jake set down the wrench in his hand slowly, did not return the smile, did not move toward him or away from him. Can't say the same, Jake said. Marcus laughed. A practiced laugh, the kind that was designed to make the other person feel like they'd said something charming. I'll get right to it. I appreciate a man who works with his hands. Honest living. He glanced around again, at the toolboxes, at Lily's drawings, at the percolator. Nice little operation. Little. Jake clocked it, said nothing. I wanted to come by personally, Marcus continued, because I think there might have been some miscommunication around this whole car situation. Ashley can be... He paused, choosing the word with visible care. Emotional, about certain things, I'd hate for someone in your position to get caught up in a personal dispute that doesn't really concern you. Someone in my position, Jake repeated. Marcus spread his hands slightly. Generous, reasonable. I just mean, you fixed the car. You did your job and you did it well, from what I hear. That's where it ends, right? There's no reason for you to be involved in anything beyond that. Jake looked at him for a long moment, and in that moment, he understood something completely. This man had come here expecting one of two things. Either Jake would be intimidated and step back, or Jake would get angry and say something that could be used against him. He'd walked in holding both options like cards, waiting to see which one to play. Jake gave him neither. You drove across town to tell me to mind my business, Jake said. His voice was level, almost friendly. I think you probably know that if you had to do that, it's already too late for it to matter. Marcus's smile didn't disappear, but something behind it did. I'd think carefully, Marcus said quietly now, the warmth mostly gone, about what's actually at stake for you here. You've got a lot to lose, Jake, more than I do. He let that sit for exactly 2 seconds. Then the smile came back, full wattage. Just something to think about. Have a good day. He walked back to his car, got in, left. Jake stood in the middle of his shop and listened to the engine sound fade down the road. Then he picked up his phone and called Ashley. He came to the shop, he said. A sharp intake of breath. What? He's rattled, Jake said. Rattled men make appearances they shouldn't make. He just handed us a witness. You? Me, Jake said. And Carl, who was fixing a lawnmower in the back bay and heard every single word. A long pause. And then Ashley said something Jake hadn't heard from her before. She laughed. Not a small sound this time, a real one. Surprised and relieved and sharp-edged all at once. The laugh of a woman watching something she'd been afraid of start to shrink. 3 days, she said, when she'd caught her breath. The gala is in 3 days. I know, Jake said. He looked down at Lily's drawings on the toolbox door. The gap-toothed crayon figures. The enormous-handed man she'd drawn as her father. 3 days, he said quietly. And this time, he smiled. The night before the gala, Jake couldn't sleep. Not because he was scared. He was past scared. He'd moved through scared 3 weeks ago, standing in his shop listening to a voicemail about his daughter, and come out the other side of it into something harder and quieter and more determined. No. He couldn't sleep because his mind was running the details the way it ran diagnostics. Methodically, checking each connection, each component, making sure nothing had been missed. He got up at 2 in the morning and sat at the kitchen table in the dark with a glass of water, and went through everything one more time in his head. The photographs of the wiring harness, Donnie's callback number and the consulting firm with the convenient address, Ashley's screenshot of that text message, gotten the car situation sorted out yet, sent 11 days before anyone should have known the car wasn't running. Carl's presence in the back bay during Marcus's visit. The pattern of small calculated aggressions that individually looked like nothing, and together looked like everything. It held. Every piece of it held. He drank his water. Checked on Lily. Still asleep. One arm thrown out to the side like she was conducting something in her dreams. Went back to bed. Stared at the ceiling. Thought about a man who had walked into his shop and looked at his life like it was small. Then he closed his eyes and slept. He didn't own a suit. This was a practical reality he'd confronted exactly 48 hours earlier and handled the way he handled most practical problems, directly and without drama. He'd driven to a men's clothing shop on Garfield Street, told the older gentleman behind the counter plainly that he needed something appropriate for a formal charity event and had a budget that was honest if not generous. And the man, who had the energy of someone who took real pleasure in his work, had outfitted him in 40 minutes. Navy suit, simple white shirt, no tie, collar open one button, because the man had looked at Jake's hands and his jaw and said, "You're not a tie person and that's completely fine." Dark shoes, polished. That was it. He looked at himself in the bathroom mirror the evening of the gala and barely recognized the reflection. Not in a bad way, just unfamiliar. Like seeing a photograph of yourself taken from an angle you don't usually see. Lily was at Carl's for the night. Carl and his wife Martha had a guest room and a dog named Biscuit, and Lily considered staying there roughly equivalent to a vacation. She'd packed her own bag, including 3 books and Mr. Peanut, and hugged Jake around the knees before he left and said, "You look fancy, Daddy," with the specific reverence of a 5-year-old encountering something genuinely impressive. He drove to the venue with the windows down. The foundation gala was held at a restored historic building downtown, the kind of place with marble floors and high ceilings and chandeliers that caught the light and scattered it into 1,000 small pieces. The kind of place that had been built to impress and had never stopped. When Jake walked in, he felt the contrast of it settle on him the same way he'd felt it at the storage facility 3 weeks ago. Except this time, he didn't let it slow his step. He found Ashley near the entrance. She was wearing a deep green dress, floor length, simple in its construction but exact in its effect. Her hair was up. She looked composed in the way that people look composed when they've made a decision they're fully at peace with. Not tense, not performing, just ready. When she saw him, she crossed the room without hesitation and said quietly, "He's here. Arrived 20 minutes ago. He's been working the room like nothing's wrong." "Of course he has," Jake said. She looked at him for a moment, at the navy suit, at the steady set of his jaw, at whatever was in his eyes that she'd been reading correctly since the first day she'd watched his hands move over that engine. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "Like a man who found the fault in the system and fixed it," he said. Same as always. Something in her expression softened and sharpened at the same time. She handed him a glass of water, not champagne she'd remembered, and said, "My attorney is here. 2 board members who've already seen the documentation." A journalist who covers financial misconduct and was very interested in a particular story when I called her yesterday. A pause. And my Uncle Robert, who has known Marcus's family for 20 years and is going to be genuinely devastated. Which is important because he's also the most respected man in this room. Jake nodded slowly. You built it right, he said. I had a good teacher. She said simply. They didn't approach Marcus. That was deliberate. Jake understood, the way he understood most things mechanical, that you don't yank a compromised component out of a system while the engine's running. You wait for the right moment. You let the pressure build naturally, and then you remove it cleanly, completely in a way that the whole system can witness. The moment came 40 minutes in. Ashley's Uncle Robert, a broad-shouldered man in his late 60s with white hair and the handshake of someone who'd built things, was standing with Marcus near the bar. Jake watched from across the room as Ashley approached them, her attorney appearing from the left side of the room at the same moment. Natural, unhurried, like a conversation that was simply continuing. Jake moved to the edge of the group, close enough to be present, far enough to let her lead. He watched Ashley reach into the small clutch she was carrying and produce a folded document, printed cleanly. The photographs attached, Donnie's number, the text screenshot, all of it assembled the way Jake had taught her to assemble it, chronologically, clearly, without editorializing, letting the facts carry the weight. She handed it to her Uncle Robert. Not to Marcus, to Robert. She said something Jake couldn't hear from where he was standing. But he saw Robert's face as he read. The initial neutrality, then the slight furrow, then the stillness. The particular stillness of a man absorbing something that is rearranging what he thought he knew. Marcus saw it too. He'd been holding a glass of scotch, because of course he had. And Jake watched him realize, in real time, what was happening. Watched the calculation move across his face. Watched him try on 2 or 3 responses in the space of 2 seconds. The warm laugh, the dismissal, the gracious confusion. And find that none of them fit the situation he was now actually in. Because Robert was looking at him now. Not with anger, with something worse than anger. The slow, cold withdrawal of a man who'd believed in you. Marcus, Robert said. His voice carried even across the room, not raised, just clear, the kind of clarity that doesn't need volume. I'd like you to explain something. And Marcus, the man who'd walked into Jake's shop relaxed and certain, the man who made phone calls instead of threats, the man who had spent his entire adult life in rooms exactly like this one and knew how to work every one of them, had absolutely nothing to say. Jake watched him open his mouth. Close it. Watched the journalist materialize at Robert's shoulder. Not intrusively. Just present, the way journalists are present, in a way that everyone in the room noticed. Watched 2 other board members drift naturally into the circle, the way people do at parties when something real is happening. Watched the room, almost imperceptibly, rotate its attention. Marcus set his scotch down on the bar behind him. A small gesture, almost gentle. The gesture of a man setting something down that he knows he won't be picking back up. He looked across the room, past Robert, past Ashley, past the attorney, and found Jake. And Jake looked back at him. Steady, unhurried. The way a man looks at a problem he has correctly diagnosed. He didn't smile, didn't nod, just held the look for exactly long enough. Then he looked away, because he didn't need the moment to last any longer than it already had. Ashley appeared at his side a few minutes later. She didn't say anything immediately. They stood together looking at the room, at the chandeliers breaking the light apart overhead, at the quiet, irreversible unraveling happening near the bar. It's done, she said finally. Quiet, almost to herself. The hard part's done, Jake said. The rest of it takes time. But the thing that needed to happen in this room tonight, that happened. She looked at him. Thank you, she said. And the way she said it carried about 17 different meanings. The way thank you sometimes does when it's really standing in for things that are bigger and more complicated and not yet ready to be said out loud. Don't thank me, Jake said. You built the case, you walked in here and you did it cleanly. That was all you. She held his gaze for a moment, then looked back at the room. "How's Lily?" she asked. And just like that, in the middle of all of it, in a marble room with chandeliers and consequences raining quietly down, Jake felt something loosen in his chest. "She's at Carl's," he said. He probably feeding Biscuit too many treats and convincing Martha to let her stay up late. Ashley smiled. A real one, the kind that reached her eyes. "She sounds like a handful," she said. "Best kind," Jake said. "The thing about justice is that it's rarely loud. Movies make you think it arrives with music and a crowd and someone delivering a perfect line at exactly the right moment. But real justice, the kind that actually sticks, the kind that means something, tends to be quiet. It tends to look like paperwork and phone calls, and a man sitting at a kitchen table on a Tuesday morning reading an email that closes a chapter he didn't ask to open. That's how it was for Jake. The weeks after the gala moved differently than the weeks before it. Before, everything had that compressed, pressurized quality, the feeling of something being held back. After, it was more like watching a slow exhale. Things resolved gradually, the way damage undoes itself when you found the root cause and actually fixed it instead of just patching around it. Marcus resigned from his firm's board within 10 days. Jake heard this from Ashley, who heard it from Robert, who had apparently had a very long and very direct conversation with Marcus's father, a man in his 70s who, whatever his faults, was not willing to let his family's name get dragged through a public proceeding over his son's inability to accept the end of a relationship with dignity. The journalist published a piece. Not front page, not explosive. A careful documented story about a pattern of financial and personal misconduct, citing anonymous sources and public records. The kind of story that doesn't destroy a person overnight but follows them. The kind that comes up when someone types your name into a search engine 5 years from now and is deciding whether to hire you, or trust you, or let their daughter date you. The child welfare case was closed formally. Unfounded complaint, no further action required. And Jake received the letter on a Thursday and read it standing at the mailbox and then folded it carefully and put it in the same envelope where he kept all the other documentation, because he was the kind of man who kept records. And Marcus, polished, calculated, glass office Marcus with his expensive scotch and his practiced smile, quietly left town. Not dramatically. Not in disgrace in any cinematic sense. He just contracted. His world got smaller. The doors that had opened easily for him started requiring effort, then started not opening at all. The city has a long memory when the right people have been embarrassed, and Robert was exactly the kind of right people. It wasn't a destruction, it was a correction, and somehow, that felt more complete than a destruction would have. Jake went back to work. The F-150 with the coolant leak, the one he'd left half-finished the day the voicemail came, got finished on a Friday afternoon. He sealed the last connection, ran the engine, watched the temperature gauge sit exactly where it was supposed to sit, and felt the specific satisfaction of a thing properly completed. That evening he picked Lily up from Carl's, where she had in fact convinced Martha to let her stay up late, and had fed Biscuit approximately twice his recommended treat allotment. She fell asleep in the truck on the way home with her cheek against the window, and Mr. Peanut held loosely in one hand, and Jake carried her inside without waking her, and stood in her doorway for the usual moment. Lily, 5 years old, 2 pigtails he still hadn't fully mastered. The person who asked him every morning if he was going to be brave. He thought about everything the last month had been. The fear in his chest when he heard that voicemail, the cold, patient work of building something that held, the moment in the gala room when he'd watched Marcus's world begin to contract. All of it, and what it had cost him, and what it had confirmed. What it had confirmed was this. He was the man he was trying to show his daughter he was. Not perfect, not unafraid, but present, and honest, and unwilling to look away from something true just because looking at it was inconvenient. That was enough. That had always been enough. Ashley called on a Sunday. Not about Marcus, not about attorneys or documentation or anything that had weight attached to it. She called the way people call when they just want to talk. Slightly uncertain at the start of it, finding her footing. "I went and saw the car today," she said. "Drove it for the first time since you fixed it." "How'd she run?" Jake asked. "Perfectly," Ashley said. And there was something in the word, the way she said it, that was about more than the car. I took it on the highway. Had the windows down. There's something about driving a car that belonged to your dad that—" She paused. "It sounds strange." "It doesn't," Jake said. A comfortable silence settled between them. The kind that doesn't need to be filled. "I've been thinking," Ashley said eventually, "about what you said. About your daughter watching how you move through the world." Jake waited. "I think I forgot to do that for a while," she said. "Watch how I was moving. I got very focused on the destination and stopped paying attention to who I was becoming on the way there." A pause. Marcus was part of that. He made being careless about it feel like sophistication. "Some people are good at that," Jake said. "You're not," she said simply. "Good at that. You're the opposite of that." He didn't answer right away. Outside his kitchen window, a late afternoon light was moving through the yard, golden and long. The specific light of a day that's been full of ordinary things and is now preparing to close. "I was thinking," Ashley said, and her voice had shifted slightly. "Careful now, but not in the way it used to be careful. Not the locked-down careful of someone holding themselves together. This was the careful of someone meaning something. That maybe Lily might like the car someday. A ride, I mean. Not, I just thought if she's never been in a Bentley." Jake laughed. A real laugh, surprised out of him. "She'd lose her mind," he said. "Is that a yes?" "That's a yes," he said. "So let me bring this home because that's what this community is here for. Not just the drama. Not just the justice, but the part that comes after. The part where you figure out what you actually learned." Here's what Jake learned. He learned that the most dangerous thing you can do to a man who operates in the dark is simply turn on the lights. Not explosively, not dramatically. Just carefully, methodically, in the right room, in front of the right people. Truth doesn't need help. It just needs space. He learned that being a single dad isn't a weakness to be exploited. It's the reason you know how to be patient when everything in you wants to react. It's the reason you document instead of escalate. It's the reason you think about tomorrow instead of just today. It's the reason you win eventually, even when the other person has more resources. And he learned, quietly, on a Sunday afternoon, standing in his kitchen with late light coming through the window, that sometimes the best things in your life come through the most unlikely doors. A dead car, a late phone call, a woman who looked at his daughter's crayon drawings taped inside a toolbox and understood, without a word being said, exactly the kind of man he was. He didn't rush that. He wasn't going to rush it. He was going to do what he'd always done. Show up. Be steady. Let the real things develop at the pace real things develop. Because some engines, if you fix them right, will run for a long time. You just have to do the work properly in the first place. If you're reading this and you're in the middle of something that feels like too much, someone coming after what you've built, someone using the people you love as leverage, someone counting on you to be too tired or too small or too outgunned to fight back, I just want to say this. Do the work. Document everything. Find your Donnie, find your Carl, find your Ashley, let the truth be what it is, and give it the room it needs. And go check on your kid. That's where the real stuff lives.